In today's video, I'm going to cover the best Warlock build for 2021 featuring top tree dawnblade. Now this build used to run the crucible until Stasis came along, but with the nerf to Stasis, you can expect to see a lot of people switching from all classes back to this build. This top tree dawn build features one of the most insane neutral games in all of Destiny, and easily the most brokenly good movement out of any class, period. When you learn to master a neutral game of this class, you can become borderline unkillable in the Crucible, which I'll talk more about later. Each section of the video is critical to mastering this build, so make sure you stick around so you can get the most out of it in the Crucible. And if at any point you find this video helpful, consider dropping a like as it really helps me out. With that, let's get into it. Before diving into the main aspects of this build, we need to cover the basics of the subclass and options that we will select that will give us the strongest foundation for top tree dawn. This includes our jump, rift, and grenade. Starting with our Warlock jumps, we have three options: Strafe Glide, Burst Glide, and Balance Glide. Strafe Glide and Balance Glide are great options for PvE, especially where jumping puzzles are involved, but for PvP purposes, Burst Glide is going to be our best option. Burst Glide allows us to effectively Warlock skate around the map since it gives you a small burst forward with each jump. For those that don't know what Warlock skating is, it's when you string multiple jumps together to build momentum and propel yourself around the map. This makes for one of the fastest ways of moving around in Destiny and can only be achieved with Burst Glide since it propels you forward where other jumps propel you upward. This helps you avoid being caught floating high up in the air and easily gunned down, while also helping improve the overall feel of the class as a whole. It's also essential for us getting the most out of our Icarus dash, which I'll discuss more later. For our rift, we have two options between healing rift and empowering rift. The healing rift allows us to consistently regenerate your health, and if you don't take damage for long, you will build an overshield. The healing rift is great for quickly getting enough health back in between fights, or when an enemy is trying to close the gap on you. It can also be useful in 1v3 scenarios, and it can be the difference in health regen that allows you to win each engagement. Next, we have the empowering rift, which gives us a 20% damage increase to all our weapons. Empowering rift has become a much hotter option since the buff to 120 hand cannons, as it allows you to 2-tap your enemies while inside your rift. I can't tell you how many killing sprees I've gone on in my empowering rift, especially when you place them with the sightlines of an enemy spawn. A pro tip to increase the effectiveness of your rift is making sure you place them near cover. This allows you to dip in and out of your enemy's line of fire to either further regenerate your health or line up your shot to make it more accurate before you peek out again. Never place your rift out in the open, as this will make you an easy kill for those stompy hunters out there. When you combine the 20% damage increase from the empowering rift with the pro tip I just mentioned around using cover, you can easily take on an entire team in the Crucible. It's for this reason that empowering rift should be your go-to option. But if 120 hand cannons get an additional nerf in the future that removes their ability to 2-tap in an empowering rift, then the healing rift will become the preferred option once again. Next, we have three options for grenades: solar, firebolt, and fusion. All three of these grenades have their uses, but all differ in how they do damage. You have the firebolt grenade, which, similar to arc bolt grenades for hunters, lands in an area and shoots a bolt to nearby enemies, doing 91 damage. While this sounds great in practice, I found it to be very easy to dodge, and hunters can literally dodge when the grenade lands, making it miss. Next, you have the fusion grenade. This grenade has moderate aim assist to help you with sticking your enemies, and is a high risk, high reward type of grenade, since if you get the stick, it will do 150 damage to your enemy. While the amount of damage is nice on fusion grenades, too often an enemy gets the kill on you before the grenade explodes, and it really only has a use for a single target, and if you don't hit that target, it's a waste. Lastly, you have the solar grenade, which does 50 damage on initial impact, and then can do continuous damage of 25 and 6 to enemies remaining in the radius. For PvP, the solar grenade is the best option here, since it does damage for sustained duration, which will delay our enemy's recovery further, on top of it doing additional damage for a direct impact, and it does burn damage over time, allowing you to briefly track enemies through walls. The solar grenade's AoE effect also gives it incredible utilization for taking down Titan barriers and blocking any points of interest like capture points or heavy. Overall, the solar grenade will give you the most consistent damage out of all our grenade options. Getting into what makes this build so powerful, and that is the neutral game of top tree dawnblade, and we'll look at spend time on Celestial Fire and Winged Sun, or the montage potential of Heat Rises. Those abilities, in my opinion, are pretty straightforward. Where the real mastery lies is in how you use your Icarus dash. This ability, when mastered, can single-handedly keep you alive and boost your KD if you're into that. Icarus dash is activated by double pressing your air dash key, and when timed correctly with your burst glide, sends you flying across the map at insane speeds. But this ability is much more than simply flying forward, since it can be used in any direction assuming you have it bound to the right button or key, which is my first tip for this ability. You need to ensure you have it bound to a key that doesn't require you to take your fingers off whatever input you use to look around in both directions. Having a keybind that requires you to temporarily stop aiming in direction will limit what directions you can dodge. For example, I had my Icarus dash originally bound to Q and found I could never Icarus dash effectively to the left, which led to me changing it to scroll wheel up, which allowed me to dodge in any direction. So you're going to want to take the time to get your keybinds right and build that muscle memory so you can dodge as effectively as possible. After you found the right keybind, you'll be ready to take full advantage of Icarus Dash and how it can be used offensively or defensively depending on the situation and your individual playstyle. It can be used to fly into an engagement, making you very hard to track, and making it easier for you to land those initial shots, or when playing more defensively, you can easily run in, then jump and Icarus Dash backwards, creating a good amount of space for you to primary down those overly aggressive shotgun apes. An area where Icarus Dash really shines though is when it comes to getting out of a bad position, such as sliding around a corner into a 2v3, finishing a kill, and escaping to regain your health, or when someone is chasing you in their super and you need to create a lot of distance very quickly. By using Icarus Dash this way, it has allowed me to survive so many engagements. As often as we try to pick our engagements wisely and read our radar, there will eventually be a time where you run into a situation you weren't expecting. This is where Icarus Dash comes in clutch, as it allows you to survive engagements you should have lost, reposition, and attack from a stronger position. I can't tell you how many times I got away with being caught out of position and survived due to this ability. There is no other ability in Destiny 2 that allows you to do a 180 and create as much distance as Icarus Dash. It does take time to master though, and focusing on using it to survive and hug corners as you dodge around them is the #1 tip I have for using this ability. Use it to stay alive. I see way too many top tree dons use this ability to fly in face first into my shotgun. Focus on mastering your muscle memory and tying that together with using it to get away and find a better position, and you'll see a lot of success on this subclass. And if you've been finding this video helpful so far, consider subscribing, as it's a totally free and easy way to support the channel, and make sure you don't miss any future build videos. Next we have the super for this subclass, and that's Daybreak, which allows us to float in the air and throw swords with some tracking. This super is one of the best when it comes to super v super duels, or using the in super Icarus Dash to hunt down enemies who are trying to run away. Speaking of Icarus Dash, you're going to want to Icarus Dash in the super the same way you would out of super. This is important because if you simply double Icarus Dash in super without timing it with your jump, you gain little to no momentum and just waste super energy. Speaking of super energy, to get the most out of your super, you're going to want to keep in mind a couple of things. First, you want to manage how often you're Icarus dashing in the super, as Icarus dashing in super too much can drain your super very quickly and cause it to end prematurely. I recommend using it to push directly at a group of enemies whose location you are certain of to help close the gap, or dodge away backwards from shotgun users or other supers that need to get closer to you like spectral blades. Secondly, you want to be patient with how you throw your swords and make sure you take a second to line up your shot. Yes, there is tracking, but it's not going to overcompensate for a sword throw that is way off target. This practice also keeps us from what I call panic throwing. This is when a dawnblade pops their super and starts throwing sword after sword and Icarus dashing everywhere, and before you know it, their super is over. In order to maximize the duration, we need to pace our sword throws and take the time to actually aim them. Which brings me to another tip for the Daybreak Super, and that's to try to position yourself in the air when throwing your swords. This will give you the best vantage point of your enemy and actually makes it easier to land your swords. Since they travel in an arcing motion, being in the sky makes that arcing motion easier to predict and make it less likely you're going to hit an object your enemy may be hiding behind. Also, for style points, if your super is finishing up and no one seems to be near you, try throwing your blade straight up in the direction of the enemy spawn, and you could get a surprise kill from across the map. Overall, this super is all about patience and being calculated with how you throw your swords and when you Icarus dash. If you're able to dash with intent and be measured in how you throw your swords, you'll be wielding one of the hardest supers to beat in Destiny 2. For weapon loadouts in this subclass, you have a lot to choose from. Because Top Tree Dawn has a neutral game that can be used in so many different ways, it can complement almost any loadout, but there are still going to be some archetypes you'll want to lean towards to get the most out of this build. In the current meta, hand cannons still reign supreme, particularly 120 RPM hand cannons. These hand cannons bring a ton of range and the ability to 2-tap most guardians with any kind of damage buff. Weapons like Bottom Dollar, Sturm, Igneous Hammer, and True Prophecy are all great options, since all these, with the exception of the Sturm, can roll with Rampage. 140 RPM hand cannons can still compete. We are really forced to play within a much closer range, but weapons like Ace of Spades can compete a little more if you prefer this archetype of hand cannon. As for our special weapons choice, this is where how you play this subclass will determine your choice. For our more passive players that like to get those sniper lanes first, you have snipers like Frozen Orbit, the Zoomy RR4, and Eye of Soul as some top options, as most of these snipers have relatively low zoom, making them easier to handle. For my shotgun mains out there, it can be a bit confusing on which shotty to choose, as with recent quick draw nerfs, you have more options than ever. Ultimately, our most consistent shotguns are still going to be our aggressive frames such as Fellwinter's Lie, Astral Horizon, and the newest addition and my favorite, Found Verdict. Shotguns like the new lightweight frame shotgun Risewalker are also good options, but they will not have the same deep and consistent one-hit kill range as your aggressive frames, but they can still be very effective. For heavy, anything really goes here. I typically prefer to run an LMG like the Commemoration or Warcliffe Coil for taking down supers or clearing an area. Because of Top Tree Dawn's powerful neutral game, it gives a lot of flexibility around what weapons are viable. So even if you didn't hear your favorite weapon here, you should always lean toward what works for you. I also have a community Discord where you can ask questions, show off your favorite weapons, builds, and even Destiny fashion, so consider joining using the link below to link up with other Destiny players. Your character stats have a big influence on how you play the game and affect everything from how fast you get your grenade back to how much overall health you have. But depending on the class and subclass you choose, the stats you invest in can vary wildly. So I'm going to cover all the stats and my recommendations on how much you would ideally have for each when running Top Tree Dawnblade. Starting with mobility, this has to be the most subjective stat for Warlock. Some people like myself prefer low mobility simply for the fact that it allows me to invest more in other stats that I find more beneficial, while others prefer higher mobility for a higher strafe and sprint speed. Ultimately, I wouldn't go higher than 4 mobility if you want to invest in this stat, since anything higher is probably taking away from a more impactful stat. Next, we have resilience, which increases our health or the amount of damage we can take before dying. Ideally, you want to land at 5 resilience if your armor RNG allows, as this will keep you from getting 1 headshot and 2 body shot killed by 120 RPM hand cannons, which can be the difference between winning and losing a hand cannon duel. Recovery is next, and it's easily the most important stat for Top Tree Dawnblade and Warlock in particular. The recovery impacts how quickly your health starts regenerating after a fight and directly impacts your survivability in the game. This also complements using Icarus dash as a way to stay alive and helps us get back into the fight as quickly as possible with our faster health regeneration. Playing Warlock, you also get an additional benefit from running high recovery, since our recovery directly impacts the length of our rift cooldown, making the stat even more beneficial to invest in. Because of how impactful this stat is, I always recommend running tier 10 recovery to make sure you're optimizing your survivability and getting your empowering rift as quickly as possible, setting you up for more opportunities to 2-tap your opponents. For discipline and strength, I tend to aim for around tier 5 for both of these, which helps balance my stats, but also makes these cooldowns for Celestial Fire and my Solar Grenade about 1 minute, increasing their overall uptime in game. Intellect in the current meta is also another very important stat in Destiny 2. Getting your super even a couple of seconds faster can be the difference between going flawless in trials and starting your card all over. Because of this, I recommend tier 10 intellect to ensure as long as you're performing in game, you'll be one of the first players getting your super every match. And if you can't get tier 10, the least amount I would recommend is tier 8. For mods, this is going to tie back to the weapon loadout you end up running and should be geared around making your weapons perform as optimally as possible. As an example, I'm a hand cannon shotty main, so I slot a hand cannon targeting mod on my helmet, hand cannon reloader on my gloves, hand cannon flinching on my chest, and double shotgun scavenger mods on my boots to make sure I have as much shotgun ammo as possible. But if you're someone who snipes or even uses fusion rifles, then you're going to use the mods that support those weapons. There are, however, some mods that I recommend everyone aim to have on their build. The first is either Powerful Friends or Radiant Light. When slotted with an additional arc mod, they can give you 2 additional tiers of mobility or strength depending on the stat distribution you're going for, and are basically just free stats for slotting one if not both of these mods. Secondly, I recommend High Energy Fire, which give you a damage boost to all your weapons when you become charged with light, giving you the advantage in your next engagement, and if running a 120 hand cannon will also allow you to 2-tap. Ultimately, your mod should be an additional tool to optimize your weapon loadout and stats to make sure you are getting as close to your ideal stat distribution as possible. For our exotic on this build, what you value more is going to impact what exotic you choose. First, we have transversive steps, which increase our sprint speed and slide distance and do wonders when it comes to improving the overall feel of our movement on Warlock. They also pair amazingly with Top Tree Dawn, since it'll help you get around the map even faster with the added benefit that as you sprint, you will reload your equipped weapon. This exotic is especially great for you sniper mains, since this allows you to quickly reposition around the map and get off tough situations even quicker. The other exotic I would recommend and that I am personally maining is the Apathettic aspect, which increases your weapon ready and reload speed, essentially increasing your handling by about 30. The reason I switched from transversive steps to Apathettians is because of the recent quick draw nerfs across all weapons. This has made my shotgun and 120 hand cannon, which as an archetype typically have very low handling, feel awful without this exotic. Apathettic aspect make your weapons incredibly responsive without having to sacrifice other weapon stats to compensate. Having the ability to swap and ADS my weapons quicker has been a difference in a lot of my gunfights, especially when it comes to switching to my shotgun, and as a result, I play better since my weapons responds as fast as I do without the delay I feel without this exotic. Additionally, you also have the option of investing more in your mobility stat if you want to get a similar feel to transversive steps. Both these exotics have their advantages, but Apathettics combined with the recent nerfs offers more advantages when it comes to winning more of your engagements. Overall, this build is easily one of the best in the game due to its potent neutral game, which is anchored by the insane movement of Icarus Dash. If you're looking for a similarly strong Warlock build like this one, check out my Devour build on the top of the screen, or if you're looking to master how to use your rifts, check out my other video at the bottom, which goes over rift placement and usage in detail.